The most evil concept ever devised by man. I would probably be correct to say that most Christians are good-hearted people who have some degree of problems or disagreement with a hell taught in the New Testament, and that many will try to reason their way out of any kind of literal interpretation. Some may be in complete denial, while others are simply ignorant to what their Bible actually teaches on this subject. Understandably, hell doesn't get much attention within Christian communities because it is not just a death of a person's spirit. It is, in fact, torture, weeping and gnashing of teeth. And of course, most Christians have friends or loved ones who are not believers. It is very rare for any church to perform a sermon on hell as the Bible presents it. Most of the congregation would never return. In fact, anybody who would accumulate all of the verses concerning hell should be able to easily recognize the extremely demented nature of this theology. Let's cut right to the chase on how it works. Horrific crimes such as raping children, gruesome murder, or any other sinister acts are actually forgivable by this God. But a thought crime, such as a lack of belief, or believing in the wrong God, deserves a torturous, perhaps even eternal punishment. When salvation is based solely on whether or not you have joined the right club, made the proper submittance, and have your name written into an exclusive book, the Book of Life, it becomes very difficult to argue it is anything but man-made. And the element of torture tips the scale from a loving God to a psychopathic God. This theology plays out as one might experience from an abusive spouse, beginning with the premise of how this person or this God is extremely jealous, and if you look anywhere else or step out of line, you will enrage his wrath. You must love him, or at least say you do, as a requirement for your salvation. Otherwise, you will end up black and blue. Ironically, Christians are always trying to wrap this up in a fuzzy love blanket. Jesus gave his life, and how precious is this gift. But just below the surface lies an undeniable evil. It is not a gift. There is a threat or a carrot on a stick, whereas you must believe and worship the correct God in order to receive it. You see, the love blanket begins to disappear once you realize Jesus very well could have died for everybody. But instead, he places a stipulation on his sacrifice to reject all those who would fail to believe in him. So, if you raped and murdered that small child, you don't need to have any fear of Judgment Day, so long as you worship Jesus. But if you commit the most heinous crime of all, the absolute worst crime any man can commit, a thought crime, and fail to believe Jesus is real, you will be cast into a torturous hell. My friends, this is nothing short of insanity, evil insanity. Might I remind you that we are talking about ancient blood sacrifices and God-men floating up into the clouds. Just how believable is it? Isn't a torturous punishment for a lack of belief a bit far-fetched, considering the abundance of outlandish magical stories together with a lack of evidence? I mean, if you weren't indoctrinated into this religion as a young child, you're going to be hard-pressed to believe in it. Christians will often tell me that the creation of life and the universe itself establishes no excuse for anybody not to believe in God. My response is, in a Christian God or just God? You see, there's a fallacy in their assertion. Most people, including myself, do not necessarily see any problem with a God or a creator. In fact, many people who are not Christian do believe in creation and have a reverence for a divine Father. But the Christian version of a God who would act in such detestable ways, resulting in so much division between people, is clearly deserving of our criticism and skepticism. The ironic twist to this sinister theology is how it results in good people going to hell and bad people going to heaven. Rather than being held accountable and appropriately punished for despicable crimes, a murderer can now receive reward. Even more demented is the likelihood of this person's victims being non-believers, who go to hell, while their murderer goes to heaven. In Christian theology, God is no longer concerned for the crimes somebody has committed, no matter how outrageous they are, because Jesus has provided a scapegoat for all sin. God only cares that people believe in Jesus before a timer runs out on them. According to Christian scripture, a Hindu mother of 5 who never hurt anybody in her life and who has rejected a pale-skinned foreign missionary is now condemned to hell for lacking a belief in the correct God. This is at the heart of Christian doctrine. If it wasn't, there would be no need for missionaries or for Christians to proselytize. Many Christians will attempt to rationalize with themselves a less evil theology, and often refer to themselves as not being traditional or mainstream Christians. I run into this a lot. I've had Christians tell me, well, you know, there is no hell. It's just a separation from God. I've also heard them say that God doesn't actually send anybody to hell, but we send ourselves. The reason they talk like this is because they themselves cannot fathom a God being so evil. But their arguments are never biblical. The New Testament is more than clear. And shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Folks, this is unmistakable and undeniable torture. The Bible often describes hell as a continuous torture, where even the worm never burns up or dies. Furthermore, nobody would willingly send themselves to hell. In fact, if this God were to be real, on the day of judgment, a sensible non-believer would plead for God to forgive them for not believing. And this Christian God might say something like this: "Tough luck. You're too late. The timer has ran out on you." Jesus will then summon his angels to cast them into the furnace. "The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire." Not only are people cast into hell, but Jesus will actually watch as they are being tortured. Revelation says this, "And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. And they have no rest day or night." Are you disturbed yet? My friends, I do believe most rational minds can recognize how this theology of hell serves only as a method to force a choice on its subjects. If you do not worship the correct God, be that a Christian or even a Muslim God, you will be roasted. This is Psychology 101. Without a threat of hell, most people would never be frightened enough to affiliate with any particular religious group. After all, if your God is silent, invisible, and fails to manifest into reality in any kind of verifiable way, you may have to implement these kinds of tactics to get people to follow. Yet this kind of punishment or reward system for your allegiance is not really love, is it? Sharith Prabhu said, "If the primary motivation for believing something is saving yourself, then the belief is rooted in self-interest or fear, not love. Love is what you feel of your own volition." Even if I did believe in Jesus, but some of my friends or even my children rejected him, it is not a possibility for me to have any kind of love for him while he watches over my children and friends being tortured in hell. So arrives my next question. How can we be happy in heaven if people we love are in hell? If Christians can be happy in heaven while friends and loved ones are being tortured in hell, then heaven is a place completely void of empathy and is more like an asylum for psychopaths. What if a Christian has a child whom they love with all their heart, but the child grows up to reject the Christian religion and is sent off to hell? Would this parent not experience grief and extreme loss for an eternity? Heaven will be a very dark place for those who are eternally separated from their loved ones. Or does God pull out his big eraser? The only possible way out of this dilemma is for God to remove feelings and essentially turn people into robots. If Christians are transformed into heartless, dopamine-filled, happy machines, then heaven is nothing but an endless concert for doped-up junkies who have no cares about anything. On the other hand, what if they get to keep their hearts, feelings, or even free will? What would keep them from grieving over the eternal separation from a child, or from sinning again? If free will is in heaven, then the opportunity to turn rogue fully exists. If one person decides to reject the Almighty in any way, then the devil, hell, blood sacrifice, and the entire Christian theology was just a charade, a joke. My friends, it is not plausible that a real and loving God would be behind such nonsensical ideologies. Which leads me to my final question in this Part 4 video. If the Christian God were actually real, how could he possibly do such a lousy job saving people? Small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Only a few find it? Why is this? Can't an all-powerful God do better? If Jesus is in the saving business and is the grand creator of all the universe and designed all the amazing varieties of life on earth, isn't it rather suspicious that he can't do a better job saving people? According to the Bible, the majority of people in this world are headed for hell. How can a wise and loving God manage to fail so drastically? Doesn't he care enough? Is God evil? His efforts are embarrassing to say the least. They are lazy or even shameful. Books and preacher men? No evidence? Here is one example for how terrible this God's performance is. Ask yourself this: why would Jesus wait 1,500 years before sending his saving grace to Native Americans, and then finally do so with black powder and rifles? Furthermore, why must an all-powerful God rely solely on men to do everything for him? Christians are asserting that the same God who created an octopus apparently needs people to help him write a book. These people can't even get their stories straight or even agree with one another. Just how trustworthy can people be? This is nothing short of ridiculous. The least he could have done is make a book that was, crystalline and atomically indestructible, like a real divine book. But no. We are left with Bronze Age writings filled with magical stories and failed or unfulfilled prophecies, brutality, and no sign of superior intelligence behind it. Furthermore, if the Christian God, or Jesus, actually exists, what is he waiting for? Why is he taking so long? Hell is filling up with the majority of souls every year that passes. Doesn't Jesus care about this? Or maybe Jesus is excited about performing his great speech to billions and billions of souls? Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire. Ironically, the Bible had to address this problem, as many back then also wondered about this very same question. Why is Jesus waiting? In 2 Peter, the author provides the answer. The Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. So the reason Jesus is taking so long is because he is not wishing that any would perish, but is waiting so that all will repent? Really? This has got to be the biggest failure of a plan Jesus could have ever organized. This is a supreme disaster, and apparently a loving Christian God at his best. Stay strong and wise, my friends.
I don't believe in masquerades. I don't believe that you're okay. I don't believe that God will save